So, obviously, thank you very much for the invitation. I feel like I've got a full pack. Now, obviously, I'm often described as a bit of a ranter. I always go to the Wigan Diggers and now I'm at the Levellers. So it is a pleasure to be here. In fact, I was talking to some of the diggers and they told me to formally invite you on the 7th of September to Wigan, when they will be holding a festivity of political radicalism, and everybody's welcome. If you visit our store, because I noticed obviously when there was two guys coming in at the back, obviously obviously been waiting for the food, but the veterans from the left will actually, Veterans for Peace, the veterans from the left will be actually on the Bakers Union stall at the Wigan Diggers. So come and visit our stall and learn about some of the stuff that they've been doing and the importance of understanding why people who have served in our armed services deserve the support and the solidarity from everybody who's on the left, and they're not from the right. We have an understanding about our communities, and we understand that our communities should always be united and never be divided. And I think what we're seeing in our society now, and when you look at probably what was happening in 1649, when they thought they was having the rising and a working class opportunity to change the system, they were probably in a political situation, maybe something similar to what we're facing today, where we seem to be having two Britons. You know, I think we've got two Britons going on. I think we've got the political class and some well-heeled people that think that society is just about whether we're in or out of the European Union. While for the other part, the other Britain, you know, the people who are suffering because of the politics that's been forced upon them, the politics of austerity, the politics of hate, the politics of division, they're the ones that are suffering with insecure employment, with low pay, you know, with discrimination, with homelessness, with having to go on cap in hand for benefits to support them to be able to live, or having to rely on charity and handouts at the food bank. Because there are two societies now, I think, in Britain. And the political establishment and the media seems to be ignoring the ones who are suffering the consequences. And you know, sometimes, regardless of which way you voted, I think the more important question than in or out is, why did people vote the way they did? Was it because they felt that the political system didn't represent their interests? Was it because they felt they'd been left behind? Was it because it's all right if you were in a position where your wages were good and you had a decent home, but if you wasn't, it was irrelevant? Is that the reason why people chose to make the decisions that they took? And that, to me, is the more important question than whether or not we should have a people's vote, although the people voted in the last one. You know, I mean, if people take part in a vote, I always thought that was a vote for people, and people were voting in it. I mean, but like I say, I'm not here to talk about whether it's, you know, in or out. I'm here to talk about the implications of a political system that has forced so many people to live in our towns, in our communities, in poverty. And I will talk and tell you about some of the stories and some of the things that we've come across while we're organising some of these workers, because some of you may not be aware. Some of you obviously will be influenced in some cases by what you see on the telly, because obviously, you know, the demonisation of the poor, those people who are on benefits and often described as scroungers, but obviously, you know, living a life of violence, being addicted to drugs and alcohol to aspire to some sort of society that they believe is a dream. They're getting out of their heads, because that's what they're doing, because life is so hard. That's the reason why they get addicted to drugs. That's the reason why they get addicted to alcohol. It's not because they're being frivolous with benefits or frivolous with what little money they have. It's because their life is so hard and so difficult. They've suffered something in their life that's forced them to take that path. And instead of demonising them on the telly, what we should be thinking about is, how do we stop people getting into that position where they feel that that is the only way to live their life? When we understand that that's the question we should ask, when we understand that that's how we build a better and fairer society and stop people lurching into those issues of taking, drinking, drugs, and actually not demonising in our media, like we demonise all sorts of different people in our media, to say, actually, these are responsible for the hardship you're suffering, so if you haven't got a home, blame a migrant. If you haven't got a job, blame a migrant. If you can't get your benefits or was cutting your pension, blame the scroungers, blame the unemployed, blame the sick, blame the disabled. Because that's the society that we're currently living in, where we're told there's all these different groups that are responsible for all of our hardship. But that's not true. It's never been true. It isn't the reason why, when we was organising at McDonald's, and one of our young workers, a 17-year-old lad called Tyrone, and you may have read about him in The Guardian when he led up to the first strike, was living on his mate's floor, because unfortunately he didn't have a family unit, like we're all supposed to have, because that isn't everybody's life. But what he did have is he had a decent job at first, he thought. He was working 40 hours a week on a regular basis until a new manager came in. But because he was on a 0 hours contract, and his manager decided he could cut his hours, so he did because he didn't like him, the flat that he had, he lost because he couldn't pay the rent. So he lived on his friend's floors. And actually, when Adichie Chakrabarty interviewed him, he was living in a car on somebody's driveway because his friend had gone on holiday, so he had to move out while they were in the house. That's a 17-year-old young lad in the 5th richest economy in the world. That's not the only horror story, because when we hold ROC meetings about why people want to join the union from McDonald's or why they want to take strike action, they tell all these different stories about why they're joining the union and why they want to take strike action. Stories like the first woman that walked out, you might have seen her when she walked out from Cambridge, and the reasons why she walked out, a single mother. And she was a single mother that used to be a married mother. But obviously we only concentrate on the issue of her being a single mother, but part of the problem was she was in an abusive relationship. The abusive relationship that the manager knew about, that caused her to have a nervous breakdown, that caused her to be off work for a substantial amount of time, but when she went back, the support she got from the manager was to shout at her, knowing that she was a very nervous person who'd been in an abusive relationship, who was on medication, and was trying to find a way in life, but he thought it was quite funny to poke fun at her and to humiliate her by shouting at her because it made her cry. That's the modern workplace that we've got in our society today. In a multi-billion-dollar company, we just launched a campaign because also as part of the reason why our members went on strike, we found out there were 17 young women, all under the age of 21, who have faced sexual harassment and sexual abuse and sexual assault. It's the modern workforce, the 5th richest economy in the world, while we're all worrying about things that really, the media tell us is the most important things. Well, our children are getting humiliated, abused and exploited while workers are being exploited. I mean, in that instance with the sexual assault, I'll tell you what happened. A manager, because he had the influence to interview people, to give people jobs, could engage people, and obviously he had a habit of taking on people that he liked. And then he'd give them hours for a few weeks, he'd listen to the conversations wherever they had the breaks, find out what they were planning and what he would do. He'd cut the hours because he had the opportunity to do that, because that's what exploitative employment contracts give the power to, the boss. And if the boss is a bit of an undesirable person, power in the wrong hands means he has the power to influence what happens in your life. And so he cut their hours. And so he'd have no money. But after a couple of weeks, what he'd do is he'd take them to the bank, the hole in the wall, and draw out 100 quid and offer it them. But obviously not for free. That's our children. That's the society that we're living in, where we're all being blinded by the political elites talking about Brexit. That's what's happening in our society. This is our people, these are our citizens, this is our community. They try and divide us and they try and discriminate against us. They try to tell us that our hardship is always caused by somebody else. The reality is, the reason why there's no council houses or decent homes in this society is because the politicians sold them off and failed to build new ones. It wasn't a Polish person, it wasn't a Romanian, it wasn't any immigrant that came into this country and took away our housing. And in fact, actually, If we was to say to those Polish builders or those Romanian joiners, please help us out by helping us build our communities again, do you know what? They'd be at the front of the queue to help us. It's never been anybody that came from a foreign country that has undermined our democracy or caused our hardships in our communities. It's been the decisions by governments and corporations designed in the boardrooms and cabinet offices of governments right across the world. They are the people that are responsible for our hardship. And you know, when we hear and we see in the media that Corbyn is a racist, or Stephen Yaxley, hyphenated Lennon, is a freedom fighter who speaks on behalf of the working class, something he's never actually belonged to, because he's privileged. And Nigel Farage, the representative of the unheard and the people who are struggling in our communities. Well, we've got a very clear message for people like that. You don't represent us, you represent the establishment as you've always done. Because the reasons why they're here in our communities is to keep us divided. They are the promoters and they are the security blanket for the status quo. That's who they are. Yeah. They are the prime Markov motives of the 2019 European elections. That's who they are and that's what they represent. They don't represent the working class because the only way we've ever improved our lives is when we recognise our strength comes from standing alongside one another. Our strength comes from supporting one another, and it doesn't matter where you're born in the world, it's what you contribute and how you defend one another that is the key to determining whether or not we have an opportunity to improve our lives. We can build a society that represents the interests of all of us, that ends in equality, that ends in justice, when we realise our strength comes from standing alongside one another. When we understand it's our collectivism that gives us strength. When we understand, and the politicians understand, that they have a duty to represent everybody who lives and works in our country. They have a duty not to create division and hate or a hostile environment as some sort of policy that's going to free us from our hardship. When they realise their duty is not to make our employment so poorly paid that we have to rely on handouts. When they realise, and we realise, that our strength lies in our solidarity, that a better country we are entitled to, we will earn. Because the struggle has always been difficult, but the struggle is made harder when they send people into dividers. Our job is to unite and to come together. Our job is to recognise our strength in our collectivity. Our job is to recognise we go out from here. And today is always a special day, I'm sure, when you come to celebrate. But the most important thing, I know we get into trouble for the Daily Mail who misrepresent what I say when I say this next little bit, which is to say, you know, it's not talking to you today that's important, it's what you do when you go out of here. It's when you go to the shopping centres and you talk to people in those shopping centres and explain to them that actually we don't have to have a society where they shut down libraries, we don't have to have a community where the school stuff is cut. We can have a better society than that, but you must tell them when you get on the bus or when you go and pick your children up from the schoolyard, that's not calling for the indoctrination of children, although political education would be a good thing, Daily Mail. I think it will actually enlighten us and make people aware of the importance of being involved in the political system. But I want to finish on this. Because there are more of us than there are of them. But the problem is they recognise their strength comes from keeping us in our place. And we for far too long believed and accepted their point of view. Our strength comes from recognising that we win when we stand together. Our history shows that. You've been out to set this morning and listened to the, you know, what happened to the levellers. You know that when we stood together and demanded the right to vote as men, we won it. When we stood together as women and demanded the right to vote, we won it. We know when we stood together and defeated fascism and demanded a better country when we came back, people won it. Our job today is not to allow them to take every game that we've ever made away from us. Our job now is to stand up and fight back. Solidarity.